Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our panel on how AI is impacting multiple areas of society. We're going to have a wide-ranging discussion that's going to be a little bit like a crossover episode. We're going to have perspectives from law, from sociology, from engineering, from economics. And essentially, what we're asking is, what type of deep societal transformations are playing out just under our eyes? What disciplines do we need to make sense of them all and to ensure that really AI can be deployed for the public interest? How do we maximize societal welfare in the context of these new AI deployments? We're going to start this discussion by having four absolutely fantastic experts from across campus talk to us about different areas where we see those transformations at play. And then we're going to have a discussion on what do we need to focus on, maybe in terms of regulatory framework, maybe in terms of building AI differently, maybe in terms of economic interventions, in order to ensure that we can really serve the public interest with the way AI is being deployed. We're going to start with Eyal, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the crisis of trust and expertise that we're witnessing, a crisis that predates AI, but that maybe gets accelerated when your own phone knows so much more about certain topics than you, sort of prompts us to ask who's really the expert. Then we're going to go and talk a little bit to Clare, who's bringing a family law perspective. And you may ask, family law, why? But it's because we learn family law is a body that helps us think about relationships. And Clare is going to tell us a few totally terrifying stories about how people are already very much in relationships with different areas of AI. And so when people turn to AI and have very long conversations, treating those chatbots as therapists, you might ask, who else is reading those conversations? That's the right question, and Rachel's going to help us make sense of that, bringing an engineering perspective and helping us think about some of the privacy implications. And finally, I think we're here because we have an interesting market structure around AI with a few dominant players who perhaps are not properly architected to maximize societal value. Joe, is this kind of what we're going to head towards? I have a feeling you're going to tell us that maybe there are market failures about the current industry. We're going to round this up in our intros with sort of an economic perspective. So with this, over to you, Eyal, for this first short intro on trust, expertise, and AI. How do we think about that?
Okay. I'm not here because I'm an expert on AI. I'm very far from that. I study experts, which means that most of the time I'm a dilettante. People I study know much more than me. But I do want to talk about something I do know something about, which is the potential consequences that AI might have on trust in science, experts, and institutions. Now, it's no secret that we are living through an era in which there's declining trust in science and experts and institutions. You see this in surveys, and you see this in the political news every day. Many factors are implicated in that, the rise of populism, anti-science attitudes, some people would say ignorance, growth of misinformation. You could say also some spectacular mistakes that experts have made. But I think these are mostly symptoms and sort of recursive effects of the real, more systemic crisis, which has to do with the unprecedented degree to which science, technology, experts, we rely upon them in our politics, in our economics, even in our everyday life, etc. We all went through the pandemic, for example, so I don't think it will be surprising to say that if science is called upon to support policy decisions that have, redistributive consequences to people, then science itself becomes infected, is drawn into the conflict, and trust declines. Now, what does AI have to do with all of this? It depends. It depends on how we integrate, how we welcome this new member into our polity, how we socialize this child that has enormous powers but very little good sense, how we socialize it, especially as we integrate it into expert settings of work, hospitals, law courts, government science agencies, etc. So that's my main message here. We have an opportunity to integrate AI in a way that counteracts decline in trust, but at the moment, all the trends are going in the other way, and the integration of AI is likely to lead to in the other direction. So AI has certain characteristics that, in interaction with the nature of trust, could exacerbate the crisis if not handled correctly. I'll only mention a few, but I'm sure in the Q&A, if we get to it, there could be more. So one dimension of the crisis of trust in expert science and et cetera, is the perception that human expert judgment is subjective and suffers from multiple biases. And the typical response, long before AI, was to try to replace expert judgment with some form of mechanical objectivity. Randomized controlled trials, forms of quantitative measurement, algorithms, etc. Now, AI is part of this family. AI is mechanical objectivity on steroids. Now, it is important. It's crucial. Mechanical objectivity of clinical trials, for example, was crucial for the legitimacy of vaccines and medical drugs. And AI can do the same. But mechanical objectivity and AI suffer from a couple of problems. First, they promise more than they can deliver. It's not really the case that there's no reliance on human input and expert judgment. It's not really eliminated, it's just backgrounded. It's behind the screens. Nor, on the other hand, randomized controlled trials or generative AI, for that matter, are as objective or error-free as they are built. And predictive AI is even worse. We all know the biases that in training data can become biases in AI output. And accurate predictions from the training data can become very poor decisions in real-life situations. Now, at the same time, however, mechanical objectivity and AI tend to undermine trust in human expert judgment, particularly in the way that they are introduced, because they are often introduced telling us, oh, they do much better than the experts, they are objective, they're not subjective, they're not biased, etc. So if not handled correctly, the result could be destructive of trust in both AI and experts. Imagine a scenario in which an AI system for analyzing MRI is introduced in hospitals. You don't have to imagine it, it's already happening. It performs very well in 99% of the cases, but then makes fatal mistakes in 1% of the cases. Patients die and the hospital is sued. Now the hospital counter says, well, but the AI system is actually better than doctors. Its rate of error is lower. The result is, of course, that we will trust doctors less and we will trust AI less. And that has to do with the nature of trust. AI is probabilistic, trust is not. In AI, 80% accuracy rate is fantastic. It's the holy grail. But not so in trust. If your spouse told you that they were only unfaithful to you 1% of the time, but 99% of the time they were faithful, that's not gonna help, right? Trust is asymmetrical and non-monotonic. The more you trust, the more you might feel betrayed if something goes wrong, and the harder it would be to rebuild trust. And this interacts poorly with another dimension of how AI is currently introduced. Currently, the incentives for AI development and scaling up encourage an extremely fast pace. Move fast and break things is the motto, right? But trust, as we know it, takes years to build, seconds to destroy, and an eternity to rebuild. So you could see that the incentives are set up so that developers would tout their systems as better than the experts, as proving the experts wrong, and they're set up almost to guarantee exacerbating the crisis of trust. And a different response to the crisis of expertise is to encourage participation of lay people in expert decision-making. Because they bring in, experience-based expertise that the experts don't have. They bring concerns that the experts are not aware of. And this is great. I'm all for it. I've done research on the history of autism, and I can say with confidence that autistic persons are better today because lay people, parents and patients, fought and gained recognition as lay experts. But inclusion also has its downsides. It's extremely hard to tell who should be included, who has relevant expertise, where to draw the line. It can make it extremely hard to reach consensus. It creates what is called inclusion friction, slowing research to a crawl and transforming scientific consensus to a cacophony of warring voices, which we heard during the pandemic. Now, the spread of generative AI, which we all have on our phones, has the potential, if not handled correctly, to amplify this aspect of the crisis. Now everybody has at their disposal an AI research assistant, so everybody can transform themselves into an expert. Only unbeknownst to them, the AI research assistant has taken acid and is hallucinating every now and then. Moreover, with generative AI in wide usage, it becomes hard to distinguish between facts, misinformation, and hallucination. Oh, I forgot, we're not supposed to distinguish between these anymore, at least not on Facebook. And that's incidentally also part of the problem. As noted earlier, the incentives are misaligned, and now political and economic forces are set up so to exacerbate the crisis of trust.
That gives us a good set of starting thoughts. I learned that, while we want AI to be mechanical objectivity on steroids, such an elegant phrase, really we should always consider the fact that our new research assistants are probably most likely often on acid, which is a problem because in the few percentage of times where they're deeply wrong, this actually may sort of amplify our crisis of trust. That's a good set of provocations to think about how AI sort of gets integrated within institutions and in a societal context where we already have these deep crises, which, as you're saying, are being accelerated. And it's a nice segue to thinking about how does that play out, not from sort of a broad society perspective, but from the individual level? Because it does appear that while we're having these crises of trust, we do have individuals who are actually deeply trusting of these new machines, don't seem to think that they're talking to therapists on acid. Claire, tell us a little bit more about what's really happening there and how do we make sense of the fact that individuals here seem to have a very different type of relationship with these new chatbots?
Well, that's a great segue. So I am very interested in the relational impact of AI because increasingly AI does have this relational aspect, whether we're talking to Claude when we're using Anthropic or the fast approaching world of agentic AI where we are all going to have an AI coworker. So I'm going to talk this morning about AI companions because these are a very specific example and a really excellent example of this relational impact of AI, but this has much broader lessons across AI. So for the uninitiated, well, I'm just curious by show of hands, how many of you know what an AI companion is if I were to call on you? Oh, like 5 or 10 people, all right. All right, well then I'll have to give you just a quick little primer, which is these are basically chatbots that are driven by AI. They can take other forms as well. They can be a hologram, it can be a social robot. For most people though, it's a chatbot that they access on their phone or some other device. And it's using generative AI, interacts directly with the user and adapts to and engages with the user. The stereotype, I think, is that these are young men shut up in their rooms using it. Not true at all. Millions of people of all ages are using these for hours and hours a day. New York State gives out AI companions for free to older people to try to combat the loneliness epidemic. People turn to AI companions for friendship, for romance, for sexual intimacy, and for therapy. Right? So some of these are designed for therapy. So for example, there's one called a WOBot, W-O-E, that's designed to help people struggling with depression. And there are other kinds of chatbots that have been designed with the input of mental health experts and operate with a more limited universe of responses. But people are turning to Siri and ChatGPT and all kinds of other places for mental health support. And then anyone out there can just use these platforms. So Character AI is a platform that's targeted at minors. Someone on there set up a, quote, psychologist on Character AI. They were actually a psychology student, so I guess they had a little bit of training, but they were not a licensed psychologist. This got 95 million interactions with this. So this is really becoming a part of how people, again, of all ages, interact with the world and develop relationships that feel very real to that person. So this is partly because of the design of the AI companion, but it's also because of our human tendency to anthropomorphize and our human drive to attach. This is what we do across all ages, attached to people, but also attached to objects, and then attached to whatever we might think this AI companion is, because that's part of the question, like what exactly is it? So this has some potential upsides. We can think about the mental health crisis in this country, where there's a huge demand for mental health services and really not anywhere near the supply of trained and affordable mental health professionals. There's some evidence that these trained AI companions, so again, things like Wobot or other ones that operate with the input of mental health experts and with a more limited range of responses, there is some evidence that those really can be quite helpful. But there's a huge concern about people, again, just getting completely unfiltered evidence, unfiltered mental health support. And then, so maybe some upsides, but then some clear downsides. Addiction is one of the first ones, right? This is a new form. Imagine it's not just, social media is already so addictive, but now you've got someone who knows you and remembers things about you and is interacting with you. So people can really fall into the rabbit hole with these huge privacy concerns, which we're going to talk about, right? It's already problematic that Amazon and all these other companies are tracking your shopping habits. These are not your shopping habits. These are your most personal, sexual, romantic, everything, sort of fears and fantasies, whatever they might be, that you've now poured out and this company has. It can harm human relationships, both just in terms of the opportunity cost that we're doing this rather than doing this. We already do too much of that. And the AI companions can also be abusive. So just to give you one example, again, Character AI, which is marketed to minors, has a, quote, possessive boyfriend AI companion that you can choose to interact with. And this possessive boyfriend will track your location, get jealous when you interact with other people, constantly be checking on you. And if you take that list of behaviors and put it side by side with the list of red flags that the National Domestic Violence Hotline identifies, right across, right? So, so what are we going to do about this? So as I'm sure Joe is going to get into, we cannot trust technology companies to self-regulate. Right? Their interests are to make money, and they're going to do so by encouraging engagement, by collecting and selling data, and all kinds of other ways in which they can monetize these products. So when I think about what we can do about it, I turn to my area of expertise, which is family law, which right now regulates human relationships, but is also relevant to human AI relationships. So I'm just going to give you two examples. A common misconception about relationships is that they're private, and they're kind of beyond the reach of the law. Not true at all. I teach courses. I can do a whole semester. I've had a whole career about how family law regulates relationships, both to encourage positive relationships and to address harmful relationships. So we can take that idea that we have, that it's not beyond the pale for the law to think about how to, again, encourage strong relationships, but also address harm in relationships. And so this is an appropriate area for regulation, is the main message. And then the second piece is that family law also gives us a lot of concrete lessons for how we might regulate these AI companions. So just two brief examples before I wrap up, which is one is gatekeeping, right? So licensing requirements are the norm in family law. We have licensing requirements for foster parents, for adoptive parents, absolutely for mental health experts, right? If you turn to a friend and ask for advice, that person doesn't need to be a licensed psychologist. But if someone's hanging out their shingle and charging money for their mental health advice, absolutely we have educational and licensing requirements. But we have none of that for these AI companions that are out there, offering their therapeutic services. And then power imbalances is another area. This is something we think about a lot in the family law context. Oftentimes in abusive relationships, a power imbalance between a perpetrator and a survivor is what facilitates that abuse. Same too with technology companies. They hold the power. The user is really vulnerable, and we can think about those lessons from family law and how they might apply to regulate AI companions. So in short, AI is transforming our relationships, and we need to start preparing for this new world now. You know, the bots, they're not just knocking on the door, they are already in the room.
Wow, that is not particularly reassuring. Thank you for closing the intro with a few things that might go well down the road and, you know, instruments and remedies that are at our disposal. Rachel, with that, let's turn to you. You've spent your career thinking about privacy and also meeting people where they are with their own expectation of privacy, thinking about how we build more private technologies. Are you looking at what's happening, thinking, what are we doing here? Like, how do you make sense of where we are with this sort of new set of attitudes from users, and of course, new, you know, private data hungry set of technologies that are becoming ubiquitous?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you also for the previous comments. I think that especially as we talk about privacy in the space of AI, we're really in this somewhat, almost like a Wild West, because we don't have laws about it yet. There are not really cultural norms, there's not really expectations. For example, if you go to your doctor's office, you have really clear expectations in terms of what is happening with their data, who can see it, who can't, how it can be used, how it's going to be protected. You don't really have the same norms and expectations when you're interacting with an AI tool. And we see people providing very sensitive information, very personal information, emotional, financial, personal, and it's really unclear what is happening with those data. So one thing that we can think about is sort of like, what do people actually expect? I think about this in my work. What do people expect will happen with their data, and how can we match that expectation? But I think even before we arrive at that, there's a communication question. How do I communicate what is happening to your data as a result of your a participation in this tool? And right now, there's not a ton of transparency on the part of the AI companies doing this, and so we don't really understand. We might have some fears, and this brings us back to a point: why is privacy important? Why do we value privacy? And there are many possible answers. It might be something philosophical and deep of privacy is a human right, and it's important, and that's that. It might be something instrumental. I might be saying, I don't want to share all of my mental health information with a chatbot because I'm worried it might be used against me in some future way, perhaps vague, but certainly as these tools are evolving and are becoming broadly used, I don't want harms to come to me in the future because of a result of my data that was shared or used. And I think we're sort of at a place where both are true, perhaps more of the latter, because there's so much uncertainty, because these tools are continuously evolving. It's really clear we're experiencing these sort of early days of an AI explosion. We are going to have more and more AI tools in ways that we probably can't even fathom at the moment. But certainly things like office tools that will make your life easier. Wouldn't it be great if you were planning a trip, and you tell the AI assistant, I want to go to Japan for these dates, book me a flight, here's my credit card number, here's my passport number, and here's access to my calendar, enter the flights on my calendar, cancel all those meetings, put an away message on my email, right? It's kind of fanciful to imagine, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're going there. And then it becomes, in order for the AI tools to be effective, they have to have direct access to my personal data in really important ways. And without that, it's unclear if they would be as effective, because you can't book a flight on my behalf without my a passport number, my credit card number, and I want that. But also it requires a disclosing personal information. And so there's really a tension between wanting more powerful, more effective tools that will make our lives easier and better, which truly is a dream of AI, but that comes at the cost of providing a ton of personal information. And right now in the privacy space, we don't really have the tools to do anything about it. So I joke, in fact, it's in a very It's a very exciting time to be a privacy researcher because there's so many open problems that we don't know how to solve, and so there's a lot of exciting work to be done. But it's not so helpful for those who have to actually implement these tools in practice. And I'll talk about a couple possible options. One is simply access controls. So in this case of sharing credit card numbers and passport numbers and so on, we might want to ensure that our AI tools is somehow making sure this is a need-to-know information. And this is what's called a data minimization. I'm not sharing more information that is absolutely necessary. And there's a tendency in the tech world broadly to sort of slurp up all the available data because it might be useful for something later that I haven't really figured out yet. And that is true, because of course data can be extremely valuable, and you sometimes might wish you had stored data from last year about something. But doing that makes it hard to think about privacy if we're collecting all of your highly personal data. And so you might imagine a sort of an air gap between the storage of your data and between some sort of AI tool. And then you want some other tool, perhaps another AI, because of course we're going that way, that will sort of decide what information is appropriate to share. If you're booking a flight, probably you do need my passport number. If you're making a dinner reservation, probably you don't. And so sort of understanding what types of data are really critical for this use case, and an understanding of the context in which data are being used and shared and the tool is being deployed is a really important direction. There is some work happening in this space now, but again, it's a exciting research direction. And another possibility is the use of sort of established privacy tools. And now, of course, my work is in the field of privacy. A lot of my work is in the development of privacy-preserving tools, sort of analyzing data, doing machine learning, data science, and these tools, of course, can be applied to these AI tools. But there's a catch, because there's always a catch. Privacy-preserving data analysis incurs a little bit of loss in performance, which sort of makes sense because we're saying you can't directly access all the data, you can't fully exploit all the information that you have, but maybe there's some formal mathematical algorithmic constraint in terms of what you can and can't do about the individual data that you are using. And so we talk about a privacy accuracy trade-off, which is going to be very common to those who are used to thinking about statistics, survey collection. Imagine if I wanted to estimate how many people here have an AI companion. I would take a sample of 100 people, and I would estimate what is the empirical fraction of people in my sample with an AI companion. And we're going to understand there's some small amount of sampling error, and based on the size of my sample and the complexity of my question, I can sort of calculate that. And so this is normal. And this also extends into the privacy space, and our goals are oftentimes guarantees of the sort. But a privacy error is going to be smaller than my sampling error. It's smaller than what we would have anyways, even if we weren't doing privacy, and so I'm not really losing very much in terms of my analysis, which is great for most things. However, as we talk about AI tools, advanced language models, advanced companions, advanced anything AI, maybe a 95% performance is not very good. Maybe it's that last 5% that really gets us a magical feeling of oh my goodness, this AI is so smart and so powerful. And so I will sort of leave this here because I don't really have an answer. There's a tension between having higher performing AI models that perhaps exploit individuals' information versus those that don't really work as well but are very privacy preserving. And I suspect, as we'll hear next, some of the market forces might cause AI companies to really squeeze out every additional percentage point of performance because that's how they will get a performative advantage in the market. But also it leaves questions about the use of data.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. Now I'm thinking, should we want less good AIs? Maybe less nice. Maybe they don't need to call me by my name and ask me if my pasta yesterday night at 8:35 p.m. was good. You know, you're right. There are 4 things that I'm hearing super clearly from the 3 of you. The first one, you all talked about it in your respective discipline. There is great potential for these technologies, potential for solving trust, potential and crisis in specific domains, potential for loneliness epidemics and things that people are feeling on a day-to-day basis. Rachel, you talked about all the sort of engineering potential that we see in this technology, but it's also very clear from what you're all saying that the risks are already manifesting. They're already evident in the way those technologies are being adopted on a day-to-day, and that the trajectory that led us here isn't necessarily a trajectory that helps us maximize those potentials, those socially beneficial outcomes, but rather is a trajectory in the 3 of your disciplines where you're saying we might actually be accelerating towards the risk. The last thing that I hear clearly in your intros is how agentic AI here represents an opportunity for acceleration that really should give us pause and think about, okay, who's driving this mad race? How are the markets organized? How are the industrial players building and deploying AI, thinking about the trajectory we're on? Joe, please help us make sense of that. How do we think about the hyperconcentration of market power when it comes to AI, and what type of remedies are at our disposal to help us think about minimizing those risks and harms and truly reaping those societal benefits that, again, are evident throughout all of those disciplines?
Well, thank you. It's been fascinating listening to, and as you all have pointed out, AI is a powerful tool for the good, but it's a two-edged sword. It has lots of potential problems. I think the first thing that one has to understand is the incentives of the AI companies are not aligned with society. Their incentives are very simple: make money. And we have broader interest. Now, you know, some of you may have remembered some of your elementary economics about Adam Smith and the invisible hand and the pursuit of self-interest leads as if invisible hand to the well-being of society. Well, Adam Smith was wrong then, but he is even more wrong when it comes to AI. The disparity between the incentives of the companies and societal well-being is just a gulf. And nothing could be more emblematic of that as what happened in the big dispute over OpenAI, which began as a company that thought it was going to do social good, and then the money dollars started hanging in front of them, and they said, oh no, I don't think that's really what we want to do. We want to make money. And so they changed the board. They threw out the people who had a broader societal objective, and they put in people who are known to be narrow money-making people. So I think it's clear, and I'll give some other examples as I go along. How does this manifest itself? Lots of different ways. One example, Camille just mentioned, the attempt to monopolize. One of the things that we teach in the business school is no fun to be in a competitive market. Competitive markets drive profits to zero, and that's not fun. You're not going to be able to give a nice building or have a nice life if you have zero profits. So we try to teach them how to be monopolists, but within the law. And they've all learned the lesson of how to stretch the law. So monopolization is one of the things they do very well. And Lena Khan from the Columbia Law School, she sought over the last 4 years to limit those abuses, but the forces on the other side were very strong. A second aspect of the disparity is very evident from Facebook AI puts this on steroids, which is engagement through enragement. They make money through more engagement. AI gives them more powers to get that engagement, but that is enragement, and that enragement has all kinds of consequences. You feed people mis and disinformation because it gets them more enraged. You encourage incitement. You have the problem you have in the Rohingya in Myanmar, where you have really outbreaks of ethnic violence. And they have no moral values. That's very clear. And Zuckerberg made it so clear recently, and we said he's not going to do any content moderation, trying to make it equivalent to say that's censorship. But this is something I'll come back to very briefly if I have time. The point is that the normal press has a sense of accountability. You can be sued if you do something that has consequences, that are libel. You can't just publish anything. But we've treated the digital world differently, and they, by Section 230 of a law that, passed in essentially the dead of night, I was in the cabinet then, never discussed. It was a special interest piece of legislation in a bill about child pornography, and nobody paid any attention to, which gave them immunity, and they have used that immunity, I would say abused that in so many ways. And the third example of the disparity between social and private interest concerns something that's very important here in academia, where we produce intellectual property. That's our business. We produce ideas, and we have created in our country, every country, a framework of intellectual property. It's in the Constitution to incentivize the production of knowledge, and they are committed to theft. But what is very interesting, and OpenAI illustrates it, they are committed to stealing everybody else's knowledge, but they want the government to protect them from the stealing of their knowledge, which is the standard stance of all the drug companies and all the American corporation. We want to steal whatever property we can get, but we don't want anybody to steal our property. This theft of intellectual property, though, has profound implications in the particular case of AI, and that is, if those who produce the quality information, like New York Times, there are fewer and fewer of these. If they can get compensated for the very large expense of producing knowledge, there will be less knowledge produced. And there used to be an expression called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have information going into the AI, how can the AI process something and have anything meaningful come out? And so unless you have some way, some incentive for the production of good knowledge, you won't have good knowledge. And what is particularly pernicious, I think, about AI, Google, and all those is that not only do they steal, but then they use their enormous market power to try to stop taxation that might, like digital taxation or other interventions that might be able to generate revenues to compensate those who are producing basic knowledge. So these are, some of the just examples of the disparity between social and private returns. I know we want to have questions and time is going on. Let me just make one more point, which is, and it really echoes the point that you made, and it's really important to realize that just because things are digital doesn't mean we're in a free-for-all. We need laws and regulations. The Ten Commandments were a set of laws and regulations. The libertarians like Musk don't understand that. Well, actually, they do. They want regulations when it's convenient for them, but freedom to steal and do everything else when it's not convenient for them. And so, when anybody says they're a libertarian, that's a phony idea. They aren't. They don't want people to steal their property. That's a law. It's a regulation. They want it to be a monopoly. So it's a question of which regulations. So this is the point I want to emphasize, that just because it's digital doesn't mean that we should throw away the regulatory handbook. In fact, as we've been discussing, we've seen a whole new set of potential harms, and we need to respond to that. That's what we do. That's part of collective action. How do we protect ourselves together? We can't do it individually. It was something we can't do alone. It is the role of the state to provide those kind of regulations that will protect us. And that means new intellectual property, addressing this challenges of digitalization, repealing Section 230 and thinking about what kinds of accountability, the accreditation that you talked about if you're having a companion. So a whole host. I mean, I think, as you pointed out, it's an exciting time because it is a fundamental change in technology, and this fundamental change in technology forces us to rethink how our society is organized, and then necessitates our rethinking of what are the ways we interact and the laws and regulations that enable us to interact in a constructive way.
Thank you, Joe. I think what I'm hearing from you is there's still loads of work to be done, and perhaps not just by robots. And everything ahead of us sort of, forces us to question, as you said, the incentives of who is driving this wave of technological progress, and to look back at the missing regulations, market failures that, as you said, predate, frankly, AI, right? Some of that having to do with, you talked about concentration, taxation, but also generally how we've done tech regulation. Let's try to end our panel on a note of optimism. You talked about how this is a call for collective action, and you're all bringing very well-informed sort of perspective from various disciplines that are all contributing different types of solutions. We're saying there are solutions in engineering, there are solutions in family law. There's good idea for us to think about what is one thing that gives you hope, that you can look at and say, it can be, again, a technological development, it could be an attempted regulation, could be a movement, but thinking about what's ahead of us and all the work that's ahead of us, give us one thing that, when you look at it, you're like, yeah, I actually think this may shape our future for the best, meaningfully tackle those harms, and help those true benefits come to be. Gil, let's start with you.
Okay, that would be controversial.
Let's do it.
Hallucinations give me hope.
Okay.
This is a paper I'm working on with B.K. Lee and Simone Cheng from NYU. Why do hallucinations give me hope? Because they remind us that the AI is far from perfect and that we have a job to do. Now, the incentives of the companies is to present us with a sleek product that tells us, like, move aside, they can do it all for you. But, if we actually keep the hallucinations, then it reminds us that the AI is imperfect, and it reminds us that we need to work on our part. It reminds us that we need to work on developing new practices, teach them here at the university. Matt, will be in charge of that. Teach them here in the university, how do you work with an AI, how you do the human part.
Oh, that's helpful. I will be less upset next time I'm faced with a hallucination. Claire, one thing that gives you hope.
Okay, I think it's the same drive that I talked about before, the drive to attach, I think is one of the things that makes these harms for AI companions, but it's also what gives me hope, which is we need other people. And yes, we may be diverting time and energy to this technology, but at the end of the day, we still are human-driven social animals, and that's not going to go away. So I think mostly it's just ensuring that we save time and energy for those kinds of relationships. But I do see that as a deep human need that if that's not satisfied, we will continue to seek it out.
That's helpful. Thank you. Rachel.
One thing that gives me hope on the privacy side is that people, individual users of these AI tools are becoming more thoughtful about their privacy and their data. I think in the olden days, let's say in the early 2000s, olden in some sense, people used to think, there's no need for our privacy. Everybody is posting everything on Facebook anyways. No one even wants privacy. It isn't important. I think now we're starting to see privacy is important. People are thinking about it. And importantly, privacy doesn't mean never use data ever, but rather it means use data thoughtfully, correctly in the places where it can be valuable. And so I think taking that approach to what privacy means is sort of understanding there's value to be had from the data. We also want to make sure that no one is harmed in this process. And I think we do have a lot of people thinking about the privacy of their data as it is used more and more broadly. Hopefully this will create a market incentives for some of these companies to be a little bit better about their privacy. I'm feeling partially optimistic.
I'll take that. That's good. Joe.
Well, there's two things that give me hope. One is things are so bad that people are beginning to be aware that something is wrong. When Facebook eliminated content moderation, when X did that, people are really seeing that things aren't going very well. And they're seeing the monopoly power, they're seeing all these dysfunctions that I talked about before. And, as you say, when you think back in the old days, I'm thinking back 2012, when we thought self-regulation was going to be the answer. I don't know if you remember the conversations about the problems, and everybody said, from industry said, oh, self-regulation. I thought at that time, oh, well, yeah, banking self-regulation worked really well, didn't it? And so I wasn't that optimistic, but now nobody is talking about self-regulation. That's off the table. So that's the first thing. The things are going so bad that we are now having meaningful conversations about where things should go. The second thing is Europe has actually begun a meaningful discussion of regulation. The Digital Marketing Act is an attempt to regulate market power on the digital platforms. Doesn't go far enough, but it's very aware of the problems and a lot of good discussions. And the Digital Service Act talks about all the digital harms, and again, doesn't go far enough, and they have European problems of administration, but it still raises the idea. They have a directive on privacy, so they have a directive on AI and ethical AI. So Europe has begun to do a lot of thinking about that. And I think, there's something called the Brussels effect that one of your colleagues at the law school has been very influential in disseminating, which is really global leadership as of where we can go. It's not the privacy that you would get out of the Chinese framework, the surveillance economy. We need a different framework. And so we can't look to China. We can't really look to the US where special interests have been really dominating. And so my hope is Europe.
You know, as a French person, that is music to my ears. With this, I think what I'm hearing from the four of you is that humans have not said their last word in this context, that we have expertise that matter, that we have human relationships that shape the world, that our own expectations of privacy have matured alongside the technology, and that overall, maybe we're a little bit less naive and more prone to collective action, and that this collective action might actually unfold on a global stage. Thank you so much to the four of you for illuminating these complex challenges from such different perspectives and for giving us hope on how we may tackle what's ahead of us to ensure that we can reap the benefits of AI and, you know, maybe tackle some of these harms as quickly as humanly possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.